Once again, good morning, everybody. My name is Alvin. I'm the regional sales based in Singapore. I would like to thank all of you for taking the time off your busy morning to join us in this 40-minute tech talk moderated by my esteemed colleague, Chad Milton. He is our Global Sales Engineering VP. I hope you can see him on the video. He will be sharing how Silverfort can complement your customer's PAM journey. Now, please feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A box if you have any during the session, and there will be a Q&A session where we'll address these questions at the end of his presentation. All right? And at the end of this whole session, you will also see a pop-up asking for some of your feedback. We'd love to hear from you whether this content is relevant to you and what other new content you would like Silverfort to present in the following months. All right? So, Chad, the floor is yours. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Alvin. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. As Alvin mentioned, my name is Chad Milton. I'm Vice President of Sales Engineering here at Silverfort. Been here a little over 3 years. My background is a combination of both security operations as well as the provider space, software, security software, both endpoint, security information management, and now identity. So with that, today we're going to present our Silverfort and CyberArk Better Together story, where we can help you accelerate your CyberArk deployments, your PAM deployments. This one is obviously specific to CyberArk, but it does apply to PAM in general. Before we get started, I do want to just frame the solution in the company real quick. So Silverfort's been around since 2016. We are a global company, hundreds of customers throughout the globe, all varieties of verticals, to include everybody from very small organizations, with a couple hundred employees, all the way up to very, very large organizations with hundreds of thousands of employees. Many technology partnerships, obviously CyberArk being one of those. And today we're really going to dig deeper into our Better Together story with CyberArk, really focused around how we can help our partners and our customers achieve faster risk reduction in the areas of, first and foremost, accelerating your CyberArk or your PAM implementation projects. We know through speaking with both our partners and prospects that sometimes that journey may be long. And with Silverfort in the mix, we can help you accelerate that and get much quicker time to value based off some of our complementary capabilities that we'll run through today. In addition to that, we will speak to one of the biggest use cases that we have, which is our ability to not only identify services accounts, but also feed that information over to the PAM solution, CyberArk, in addition to enabling what we refer to as virtual fencing, again, which we'll get into during the demonstration. And then the second area that I'll be focusing on specifically within the CyberArk realm is our ability to enable MFA and zero trust across all PAM components, not just the initial gateway entry into the CyberArk portal, but beyond that, when users launch PSM sessions and things of that nature. And again, all of this, the main thing for the ability of Silverfort to help accelerate time to value with CyberArk is the fact that we don't actually require the customers to deploy agents, proxies, or any type of complex code configurations or changes within their infrastructure to achieve this, which is a segue into Silverfort and how we work. So this is a very key component to understanding our approach to the problem and how we're able to complement PAM solutions out there today. Our architecture is unique in how we've approached the problem set. And basically what our founders realized is when they were looking at some of the gaps within enterprise security these days, especially as it relates to broader multi-factor authentication coverage, they realized that instead of going down the agent or the proxy path, there's a finite set of authentication protocols that are leveraged between users, service accounts, and the resources and infrastructure they're accessing. Those being Kerberos, LDAP, NTLM, and Radius from a traditional on-prem protocol perspective, and then SAML and OIDC from more of a cloud-native authentication protocol. So as users are accessing resources throughout the infrastructure, again, whether that be on-prem or in the cloud, they're obviously leveraging these authentication protocols and hitting a directory or an identity infrastructure somewhere, whether that be cloud-based like Azure AD, Okta, or Ping, or even on-prem in the case of Active Directory. And so the way Silverfort, the way we've architected our solution is we allow those users to authenticate just as they do today, and we integrate at that directory level so that when the directory receives that authentication, it's then forwarded to us to basically form a second opinion. And that second opinion is essentially one of three things. It looks benign to us, go ahead and allow it. It looks nefarious to us, so go ahead and block it. And then the third one, which is essentially the middle ground, is it looks suspicious enough that we should go ahead and step up the authentication and have the user prove to us that they are who they say they are through some sort of second factor. And that second factor can be a variety of existing authenticators that are out there today, whether it be Duo, RSA, Okta, Microsoft, even our own authenticator, all the way down to physical tokens like FIDO2, Yubico YubiKeys, OTP, things of that nature. And then once the user authenticates through that second factor, we get the response, and then the ultimate decision is routed back through the directory to those requesting resources and users. So from their perspective, they don't actually realize Silverfort's in the mix because we're on the back end, but you now have that second layer of granularity to extend MFA everywhere. And in the case of CyberArk and PAM, enforce a stronger zero trust model beyond just the gateway into CyberArk and then launching a PSM session, which I'll get into here in a second. So with that, let me go ahead and switch over to the demonstration, and we'll start through the first use case around service accounts. So what you're seeing here is our service accounts landing page. Again, based off the architecture, as you can see, we're seeing all that authentication traffic. So whether it's human to machine or machine to machine, we're able, our machine learning engines, our AI, if you will, is able to discriminate or determine the difference between that behavior. Because as you can imagine, service accounts behave differently than a more interactive user to machine or infrastructure would act. So we're able to identify service accounts, and because again, we're seeing all of that authentication, we can identify those dependencies very, very quickly for our customers. And this is really where the complementary aspect to the PAM solution comes into play. So I know in the case of CyberArk, there's a DNA type capability where it can go out and scan for various service account dependencies. Sometimes that takes a little bit of a lift or a period of time to get that information. But because Silverfort's seeing all that traffic, all that authentication data, we can very quickly identify these for you. And more importantly, we can also send them out in the form of a report so that you can immediately export and import those and much more quickly onboard service accounts within the PAM vault itself. Now, just like anything, right, in our world, it's trust but verify, especially in the zero trust realm that we now live in. So as we identify these dependencies, where the service account is authenticating from, where it's going to, we also give our customers and our partners the ability to investigate and do a level of validation. So here in the top right, you can actually see the behavior over the last 7 days. The x-axis here is time, your y-axis is your volume of authentications. And you can see very quickly that this is some sort of automated process where every hour it's producing 8 Kerberos authentications, and then every 12 hours it bumps up to 10. But very quickly, just from a visual perspective, you can see that this is some sort of automated communications. This is not a user behind the keyboard doing this type of function every hour on the hour. So then once we identify these dependencies, we can obviously feed those over to the PAM solution to get those service accounts onboarded. And then you can follow security best practices around rotating those passwords without the risk of potentially breaking business critical applications. But in addition to that, what Silverfort also has the capability to do is put virtual fencing around those dependencies. So basically, we follow a crawl, walk, run model so that as you put this policy in place, basically stating we're going to go ahead and allow from these sources to these destinations that we've seen the dependencies or seen the authentication traffic thus far, we can then determine when it goes outside these boundaries, this policy, what action would you like Silverfort to take? Initially, we may just alert, write it to a log, let somebody review that, triage it a little bit, update the policy, tweak it maybe, but then move it into more of an active alerting mode to where if there is a deviation, send a real-time alert so that an analyst or somebody can take real-time action against it. And then ultimately for your service counts that have high privilege capabilities, which this is one of, instead of not only just giving you an alert, let's go ahead and lock it down so that you have this level of assurance that if the adversary, for whatever reason, compromises this account during the window between the time that you're changing or rotating those passwords within the PAM vault, you have the level of assurance that it's not allowed to go beyond the policy that's been set here, because we would block the access and we would provide a real-time alert when those activities happen. So again, very complementary to PAM solutions. Obviously, industry best practice, rotate passwords as much as you can. But with service accounts, it's always challenging and problematic because if you don't know all the dependencies, you usually run the risk of breaking potentially mission critical or business critical applications. With Silverfort, we mitigate a lot of that risk because now not only can we give you those dependencies, but we can also put this virtual fence around those dependencies that we've seen to ensure that in the event this does get compromised from an account hijack perspective, it won't be able to go beyond the boundaries of that fence. Okay, moving a little bit further into, let me just step back here. So that was essentially adding runtime restrictions to service counts through what we refer to as this virtual fencing capability. Now I'm going to transition more into the extend MFA everywhere and zero trust capability across various PAM components. So I'll slide over here. You should hopefully now be able to see the CyberArk Vault web interface. I'll go ahead and log into that. As I do, I have my phone tethered over here. So you actually be able to see as it logs in, it'll prompt for MFA. Again, CyberArk has the ability to do this today already. We also have the ability to support this as well. What you're seeing over here is a Microsoft Authenticator. I'll obviously go ahead and say approve it. Once I approve it, it will then let me into the portal where I can actually go in and do a variety of mechanisms. Now, the first one that I'm going to show you is extending MFA beyond just the entrance into CyberArk, but also when an admin or when a user checks out a credential and then attempts to launch a session manager type session. So in this case, I've got my admin account and I'm just going to go ahead and launch this. Maybe it's a change control ticket. And I'll select the system that I want to launch it to. This one here. Go ahead and click connect. Now, when I do this and I launch this, I have a policy on Silverfort's side that says, go ahead and prompt me for MFA again. Again, zero trust, trust no one, verify all the time. So notice that my PSM session is launched, but it's just waiting to connect to that system until I approve the MFA request. So in this case, I'll go ahead and approve it again, at which point you can see that it releases me, completes the RDP session, and allows me into the system. Now, one of the biggest use cases that we're working with a lot of our partners and customers on is the ability to enforce the use of CyberArk and specifically Session Manager so that admins can't bypass it. We were working with a US bank recently that they did their own assessment in order to try and lock down the use of CyberArk as the bastion host through PSM. In order to lock that down, they estimated they would have to implement upwards of a few hundred different firewall rules across their environment. So with Silverfort, as you can see, I was able to launch PSM into this system, no problem. But if I were to go back to my desktop and attempt to go and remote desktop direct, again, using my admin credentials, the same one that's currently in the vault, and I attempt to do that, notice I immediately get denied. So the beauty of Silverfort in this case is we can actually lock down and enforce the use of PSM CyberArk via a singular rule. So you don't need to go in and you don't need to implement all these firewall rules. You don't need to, segment the network through microsegmentation, things of that nature, in order to do this level of enforcement. And that even goes beyond me trying to do it from here, but also even now that I'm in this session, if I attempt to bounce to another system using those credentials that I already just checked out, notice that when I do that, I get denied as well. Now, very quickly, I'm going to go ahead and transition to our admin console, and I'll show you the mechanisms and the logic of how we're able to achieve that, because it is pretty straightforward, but also very, very powerful for most organizations to be able to enforce that zero trust model. So here is essentially our policy screen. So this is where we define the policies around the use cases that I'm showing you today. The first one that you saw here is just me going to the portal when I authenticate via LDAP. And our policy constructs are just like any other policy engine, where you have to define a series of conditions that have to be met in order for an action to be taken. So in this case, because we're authenticating to CyberArk via LDAP, this one is applying to Active Directory via LDAP. It's an always-on policy. Because we use a shared environment, it applies only to my 2 user accounts, so I don't mess with anybody else's demos. The application IP, again, because this is LDAP, it would be bound to the actual IP address. And then once these conditions are met, what action is Silverfort going to take? In this case, we prompted for multi-factor authentication. Now, the use case I just showed you in our ability to lock down and enforce the use of PSM and CyberArk for all RDP is a combination of really 2 rules. The first one here is the MFA prompt for the PSM session itself. So beyond getting into the vault, once you then launch a session manager type session, the user then gets prompted again for MFA. You can do this. It's not necessary. It's not required, if you will. But again, in a zero trust world, never trust, always verify. So in this case, basically what we said was anytime, again, my user accounts sourcing from CyberArk, I'm going to prompt for MFA, no matter where I'm going to in the domain. Now, the way we're able to ensure that that's the only way or the only place I can RDP from is through this singular deny rule. And basically what this is saying, and the actions that you saw, is, again, for my 2 accounts, no matter where I'm sourcing from, except my CyberArk infrastructure, going to anywhere, then go ahead and deny my access. And that's effectively what you just saw during the demonstration. But again, if I go back to trust but verify, we also give you all of the rich, detailed log information of the user activity that I just showed you. So for example, you saw earlier here, this was when I approved the MFA request specifically for the PSM session manager launch to that system. And I approved the MFA and I was allowed in via RDP. But then when I tried to RDP from a different source, meaning my desktop here, or to that other system from the PSM RDP session, notice both were immediately denied, and it even tells you not only how it was denied or why, but the policy itself that denied it. So again, a lot of rich information, all of this of which can be sent off to your existing security controls like your SIM, like your log management systems, any type of orchestration platform that you may have. But again, a lot of rich information here around user activity as it relates to their authentications. So I know we are coming up on our allotted time, and I want to open it up for plenty of Q&A. So again, just to summarize real quick, we went through how Silverfort can help with your accelerating your implementation projects with CyberArk by our discovering of all of the dependencies, both from a user perspective and a service account perspective. And then also our ability to extend MFA and zero trust policies across all the various PAM components, specifically around PSM is what I showed. And in addition to that, also enable you and your customers to essentially enforce the use of PAM very, very quickly through a singular policy. So with that, I think we'll open it up to the Q&A session at this point, if there's any questions out there.
Hi everyone, if you have any question, you can type in the Q&A. Meanwhile, we have some few questions here, chat. So I'll just start the question and maybe you can answer this question. Okay. So the first question is, I think they said that how if the customer already have CyberArk PAM and they already implemented a MFA on that, why should I need Silverfort here?
Yeah, so again, it really depends. I mean, PAM, as I learned very early in my career, there is no silver bullet, right? There is no one solution out there, which is why we practice defense in depth in our industry. So what I would say is it really just depends on the level of maturity you are with your PAM journey thus far. But regardless of that level of maturity, one of the biggest areas that we're able to help accelerate and complement is our ability around the discovery of all those dependencies of what a user is accessing, as well as what a service account is accessing, to help you more quickly onboard new accounts, maybe service accounts that you weren't even aware of, that you didn't discover previously, and all of their various dependencies to minimize your risk of breaking business critical applications as you go through vaulting and rotating the passwords for those systems. Hopefully that answered the question for you.
Okay. Thanks, Chad. I have one more question here is, how long is the typical Silverfort setup to achieve this kind of protection?
Yeah, great question. So obviously it directly correlates to the complexity of the environment. If I go back just briefly here to the how it works slide, obviously we integrate at the directory level. So depending on how large the organization, how many different directory infrastructure devices they may have, the typical deployment window for us is very quick, a few days, few hours, depending on the size and structure. Because again, we're not having to deploy agents or proxies out on your end user systems, out on the resources that they're accessing. We're solely integrated at the directory level. So we've actually deployed a customer with about 120 domain controllers over a 2-day period, once they had all the various infrastructure components on their end ready for it. And then as soon as we're integrated at the directory, number 2 here, we're seeing authentications almost immediately. So again, time to value, very, very quick with Silverfort.
Chat, we have another question here. So the question is, these solutions also work with other PAM solutions like Beyond Trust or Galenia?
Absolutely. So again, those solutions from their own web portals, obviously they have their own MFA capabilities for that first use case getting into the vault. But again, once they launch those sessions outside of the PAM solution, that's where they're essentially authenticating again to that infrastructure out in the environment, hitting the directory. So we're going to see that. We're going to be able to do the exact same things that I just showed you with CyberArk. I've got a lot of good friends that were over at Dichotic before it changed over to Galenia, and all of the same use cases apply, from our service account discovery to extending MFA and zero trust to those solutions as well.
Okay, looks good. I think most of the question already answered here. Okay, so just wait for a while, see if there's any other question from the participant. Okay. So we have a couple more questions, chat. Okay. So let me read the first question first. So this use case doesn't seem to be applicable for CyberArk Privileged Cloud, especially for PSM for Windows or PSM proxy, as it supports MFA with direct connection via CyberArk identity, supported MFA with tenants. Okay, so is there a plan for integration with auto onboarding to CyberArk when service account is found with a similar capability as a DNA tool within CyberArk?
Yeah, great question. So on the question 2 there, the auto onboarding, we are working toward that. As you saw in the service accounts page here today, the first mechanism for that is the PAM report. The next mechanism, just as you saw here in one of our actions for the virtual fence, is we're able to send it to SIM. So the next evolution of that will be the ability to auto send that information through either APIs or some sort of mechanism, automated mechanism, as we discover new dependencies, so that the PAM solution itself can onboard those additional dependencies automatically.
Yep. So the answer is yes, right? One more question. Yeah. So one more question. I think maybe we can just ask this in the session as well. Does the Silverfort solution support both on-prem and on-cloud setup?
Yeah, great question. So again, we do. The nice thing about our capabilities is we are directory agnostic, so we can integrate both with Okta, Ping, cloud-based identity solutions. Obviously, those cloud-based identity solutions have their own MFA capabilities to a certain degree for their cloud-based native apps. So where Silverfort really comes in is becoming that control plane of visibility, both from a cloud and on-prem perspective, to be able to discern risk across the entire environment. So again, probably worth a deeper dive follow-up discussion with regard to those capabilities, because they're a little bit outside of the specific PAM discussion. But yes, we do support both on-prem and cloud integrations.
It looks like we have answered all the questions here, chat. Okay. So thank you for your time. Appreciate that. Okay. So, and also thank you to all participants who have joined our Tech Talk today. Okay, stay tuned. We will have more interesting topic to be done by Silverfort team here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you, everyone.